Wow. Cracking creme brulee is one of the most fun things you can do in all of eating. That was very satisfying. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I have a recipe that is perfect for the height of fall. The leaves outside are like the most beautiful shades of orange and yellow, and I'm just really in the fall spirit. So this is a recipe for vanilla pumpkin creme brulee. It really shows off like all the warm spices and pumpkin flavors that you want in a fall dessert, and it's just kind of like the perfect comfort dessert for when the weather turns cold. I'm gonna show you how to make it.
What do you love about fall?
Okay, I love fall because not only is it like my perfect weather, I'm not really someone that's like built for hot weather. I love summer for the food, but I also get really excited when the weather turns cold, and I love winter squash and pumpkin. These are flavors that I just naturally gravitate toward, and I'm always trying to like find new ways to use them and incorporate them in all of my meals. So like dinner, breakfast even, and then of course dessert. I feel like so many sort of pumpkin-y, squashy things like work so well as a slightly savory element in dessert. So I'm incorporating pumpkin into this creme brulee recipe. You can think of this recipe as kind of a more custardy, more dairy-heavy, like pumpkin pie filling in a sense. Like it doesn't have as high a proportion of pumpkin, but that's what I'm going for with the flavor. So it's like, this would be such a great alternative to pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving. If you're like not really a pie maker, you don't want to deal with crust, or you want to go gluten-free, this is like the perfect dessert for that. It's a little bit fancy because we're going to brulee at the top of the torch. It just feels like a little special, and fall feels special to me. So this is a great fall dessert. Before I get into the recipe, I want to take a minute to thank our friends at Heilala Vanilla for sponsoring this episode. Heilala is the maker of superior vanilla products. All of their beans are grown in the Kingdom of Tonga, where they are hand-picked and hand-cured. I love that it is a women-centric business that invests in the community where the beans are grown. I've been using Heilala Vanilla products for a long time, everything from the extract to the vanilla sugar to the vanilla paste. I love how no matter what you're using, it imparts incredible complexity and intense vanilla flavor to all of my baked goods. Using good vanilla makes such a big difference in the desserts, especially for something creamy and dairy heavy like a creme brulee. I especially love the vanilla paste, which has real vanilla seeds suspended in a mixture of extract. So easy to use, and anytime you add even just a little bit, it just perfumes everything with an intense vanilla flavor. I love using the beans. Every single bean is so juicy and fat and filled with seeds. They're never dry, they're never brittle. It's just such a pleasure to use them in all of my baking. You can learn more at heilalavanilla.com and click below for the link Claire23, which will get you 20% off of your total order at Heilala. So thanks so much. I'm going to use some of the products in the recipe I'm about to show you. So ingredients. Ingredients are pretty straightforward. I have heavy cream and milk. I do a mix. I have pumpkin puree that I scooped and mashed from a sugar pumpkin. I'll talk about that. 6 egg yolks, a 1/4 cup of maple syrup, demerara sugar. I have some warm spice, so I'm using cinnamon, a little bit of nutmeg, and a little bit of 5 spice, I'll talk about why, plus kosher salt, and then finally vanilla. I'm gonna use a scraped vanilla bean for the seeds, as well as some extract. Oh, and sugar, regular sugar for bruleeing the top of my creme brulee.
Special equipment.
Okay, while the ingredients are pretty simple, you do need a little bit of special equipment. So I have 8 ramekins, all set in a roasting pan because I'm gonna do a water bath, so you'll need that. I have an immersion blender. If you don't have an immersion blender, you can use just a standard blender, and then a small saucepan, a strainer, and then of course for bruleeing the top, a torch. My torch is right here. See previous creme brulee episode, this is the correct torch.
Not going on now.
Yeah, but that's not...
Reminds me when I was a kid and
We're not
you take like spray deodorant.
I just get so excited when the grocery stores have pumpkins outside. Then you know it's fall. This is called a sugar pumpkin, aka a pie pumpkin. So you'll see them in grocery stores this time of year, obviously like leading up to Thanksgiving. And I go back and forth sometimes between like making your own pumpkin puree or a squash puree versus just canned. I think both are good actually. So I was just really excited to use fresh pumpkin for this recipe. In fact, I also considered baking them in pumpkins, the creme brulee, but I thought better about it. Not the best use of pumpkin, I think, but I was excited to incorporate fresh pumpkin here. So I had a second pumpkin, and last night I split it open, I cut it I like halved it through the equator this way. Then I scooped out the stringy, seed kind of filling. And then I roasted the halves. I didn't put any oil or anything on it. I roasted them just plain, cut side up on a sheet tray in the oven at 350 until the flesh was tender. But what happens is the exterior, that sort of exposed cut surfaces, really dry out and dehydrate. And that's what I wanted, because I wanted to really drive off a lot of the water. So that's why I scooped it before roasting it. You could actually just roast it whole, poke a few holes in it. But what I wanted was pretty dry, concentrated pulp. So here I have 3/4 cup that I scooped from the pumpkin yesterday. And it still has a kind of raw vegetal flavor. This is something that I really appreciate in pumpkin, and it's sort of related winter squash, but it's not going to be the best flavor for the creme brulee. So I'm actually going to cook this further and caramelize it. And that's really the first step in putting together my creme brulee mixture. To this, I'm going to add the seeds from a whole vanilla bean. And I'm going to use the bean to infuse the mixture as I'm warming it up on the stove. This is a Heilala Vanilla bean. I'm going to use the seeds from the entire bean and then save the pod, put that in my custard as I'm putting the mixture together. I love the beans because they are so juicy and fat and just filled with seeds. So I'm going to show you how to split it. I like to start by running just the very tip of a paring knife down through the pod, but I don't cut all the way through. So it's not like I'm halving it lengthwise. I am just going through one side of the skin. So not cutting all the way through.
It's like opening a pencil pouch.
Yes, you're unzipping it like it's a pouch. Then I use my 2 thumbs and I kind of open it up like a book. And you're exposing all of those teeny tiny little specks inside. Just like that. And then once it's opened up, my finger goes on the front, on one end. And then see how I'm using the back of the paring knife, not the sharp side? I'm using the blunt end of the knife and scraping down really firmly along the entire length of the bean. So in one pass, I get probably 90+% of all the seeds from inside. I'm going to add this to my pumpkin. And then I like to do a second pass, kind of second pressing of the bean, so to speak. And I really scrape it out. Because vanilla beans are so prized and they're so labor intensive, and there's such sort of specific conditions under which they grow, I never want to waste any of it. I never really want to waste anything, but particularly an ingredient as special as a whole vanilla bean. Now I'm going to go over to the stove. I have a small saucepan. I want to also say that I have my oven on 325, so it's preheated for cooking the creme brulee, and everything else is going to get assembled over at the stove.
You're at a 5-6.
I'm at a 5.
Great, 5. Okay.
One day I'll learn what that means. Okay, so I'm over here at the stovetop. I have all of my custard ingredients. I'm using 2 sweeteners for the creme brulee. And the custard itself is not overly sweet because of course it gets that caramel on the top. So I want the whole thing to be nicely balanced. I'm using a combination of demerara sugar, or raw sugar, kind of a less refined granulated sugar, and maple syrup. Maple of course goes so well with winter squash and pumpkin. So the first thing I'm going to do is caramelize the maple. Maple has a lot of water in it, so by boiling it and cooking off a lot of the water, you're concentrating the flavor and kind of, giving it more kind of bittersweet notes. And then I'm going to add the pumpkin and cook the pumpkin, kind of caramelize it in that maple mixture. So that's the first step. So I have a 1/4 cup of my maple syrup. Make sure you use 100% maple. My pot was already a little bit hot. I have it on kind of medium high. This is going to come to a boil, and I'm doing this cooking step because not only do I want to kind of develop the flavors of that pumpkin, but because it is basically going to allow me to create a warm preparation, a warm custard. And anytime you're baking any kind of custard, it's a lot easier to start with it already warm, because it's just that much less that it has to then come up to temperature in the oven, and you get usually a more even kind of cooking on it. So anytime you see you heat the dairy and then you add it to the eggs and sugar, that's in service of kind of a faster cooking for your custard overall. So that's why we're over here at the stove.
And that's just the maple.
It's just the maple, yeah. And that's just all that water boiling off. All those bubbles.
Smells good.
Doesn't it?
It almost has a fruit, grape kind of, or some kind of something new to it.
Yeah. Definitely your nose is going to be an indicator for when you're kind of reaching that caramelization point. I often also look at the bubbles that are forming. Like big rapid bubbles that's an indication that there's like still water that's being cooked off. When you have like slower glassy bubbles, that means you're kind of at that like candying stage. It doesn't take that long. I only have a quarter cup in here. So it's been boiling for maybe a minute or so. I can tell that I'm at that like slow glassy bubble point. So now I'm gonna add my pumpkin. Again, this is 3/4 of a cup. If you wanna skip the roasting your own pumpkin part, you totally can. Just use 3/4 of a cup of pumpkin puree from a can, not pumpkin pie filling, but 100% pumpkin puree. So of course I have my vanilla seeds. So those are also gonna kind of cook in there and perfume everything. So in this goes. Just be careful because that maple's pretty hot. You might have a little bit of sputtering because there's moisture in that pumpkin. And see how I have some stringiness from the pumpkin? That's really normal, but this is all gonna get pureed. That's very normal and totally fine at this point. So again, I'm on kind of medium high still. And I wanna just stir this pumpkin through, get it coated in the maple, and then just kind of cook it out basically. And this is gonna help kind of develop some of the natural sugars in the pumpkin and bring out those flavors rather than the kind of like raw, squashy, like super vegetal flavors. So you just want to cook this until a lot of that water in the pumpkin is kind of driven off. You'll hear like, you can see some of that water boiling out. We want to get rid of all of that because we want to replace the water in the pumpkin with our dairy, like our milk and our heavy cream for richness. So that's just going to create the most concentrated flavor. And once that water is driven off, then you'll start to get a little bit of color on the pumpkin, which is also what you want, getting it really nice and caramelized. Okay, so this is looking and smelling really good. Most of that water is gone. So now to this, I'm gonna start adding my other ingredients for my custard. Into the pot goes my heavy cream first. That's important. If you're gonna pour whole milk into like an already hot pot, there's a non-negligible chance that it could split, but with heavy cream, you don't have that problem because of the fat content. So in with the heavy cream first. And my heavy cream is room temperature, by the way. That's also kind of important. So I'm just stirring this in. Then I'm gonna add my milk. And this is the base for our custard. Now to this, I'm gonna add that scraped vanilla pod. So save this, there's so much flavor in the vanilla pods, and I have also a jar of homemade. So I don't know if you can see, but I have tons of vanilla beans floating in here. I save the pods and I use it to make my own vanilla extract. So once this comes out of my custard, I'll actually rinse it off, dry it, and put it in my homemade vanilla extract. So that's gonna go in there, and that's gonna continue to infuse its flavor into my custard, which I'm really into. And I wanna let this come up to a really gentle simmer. It looks a little gnarly, I understand that, because of the pumpkin. So then I'm gonna turn to the rest of my ingredients. The first step is called blanching. That is where you are going to whisk your egg yolks. Sometimes there's whole egg in there, but it's usually just yolks. In this case, I'm using 6 yolks. I'm combining my yolks and sugar. So I have some maple already in the custard, but I'm also using demerara sugar. Blanching means you're whisking together the eggs and the sugar until the mixture is kind of pale and like a little bit lighter and a little bit voluminous. So blanching almost always precedes tempering, and tempering is the next step I'll show you, where I'm going to stream a little bit of the warm mixture into the eggs. So I have just like a super gentle, the barest kind of simmer going under my my cream mixture. This is why I have bad wrists. So now I'm going to go onto the next phase, which is tempering. So I'm going to bring my eggs over here. So I'm going to just turn off my heat for a second. I'm going to whisk this hot cream mixture into my eggs slowly while whisking constantly. And this is going to gently raise the temperature of the eggs without cooking them.
You're having a good time.
Except for this like gross curdly looking pumpkin mixture, but whatever. Okay, so that goes in. Let's get that bean in there also. I'm gonna scrape in any little bits of pumpkin as well. So now I'm gonna whisk in my spices. So here it's actually, I ran out of little bowls, so I have 2 spices in here. Each I would say is a generous pinch. I have 1 generous pinch of nutmeg. Again, not my favorite baking spice, but it goes so well in pumpkin pie. So I want all those kinds of pumpkin spicy flavors in my creme brulee. And then the other one, I was actually looking for cloves. We don't have ground cloves. I guess I'm out. But the other one is a Chinese 5-spice, which is a mix, and it has stuff like star anise and cinnamon in it and clove. It's such an amazing and kind of like undervalued baking spice. It has all the kind of warm spices that we like. So a really good addition. It smells so good. So that's going to go in. Then of course I have cinnamon, which is like the most common kind of warm baking spice. Just a teaspoon. I don't want it to be overly spicy. I think sometimes a lot of pumpkin desserts go way too far with the warm spice. So I want it to be kind of subtle. I want it to be like a presence in the background, but not like the first thing you taste is clove, for example. This is so strong. Then some kosher salt. Don't worry about the cat, he's fine. So whisk all that in. The last thing I'm going to add before I show you how to finish the custard is some vanilla extract. Of course, I already have the bean in there, but I want a really pronounced vanilla flavor. It goes so well with like the maple and the pumpkin. So I'm going to eyeball just about a teaspoon. Okay, and now that I have everything mixed together, there's one final step before I can fill the ramekins and get the water bath going and get them into the oven. And that is I need to blend the custard because the pumpkin is still in those little pieces. I'm going to bring it over to the countertop. I'll show you how to do that. Obviously, I'll take out the vanilla bean, the pod, before I do that. But that's it. We're basically almost done. Except for the baking and the pureeing and the chilling and the bruleeing. But I feel like that's the hard part. This is the hard part. Yes, Harris?
Where's the bacon?
We ate it.
Unbelievable. How was the thick stuff?
Really, it was good. Okay, so I'm going to rinse this off so I can put it into my vanilla extract. One of my secret favorite baking tools is an immersion blender. They're just so convenient because all you have to clean is this little piece that's only this long rather than the whole jar of a blender. And it's so convenient because you can just blend whatever it is inside the vessel that it's already in. So a saucepan or a bowl. So they're just so convenient. And no, they're not gonna get something as smooth as a high-powered blender, but all we're doing is pureeing a little pumpkin. So it's more than up to the job. Just a super handy, also super inexpensive tool. If you don't have one, but you have a regular blender, just transfer it to the blender and turn on, you don't need to go full force. But point is, these are really useful. So I'm just gonna go ahead and give it a buzz.
You did remove the vanilla bean.
Yes, the vanilla pod I took out, and like I said, I rinsed it, and I'm gonna put it in my homemade extract. So this I'm just gonna buzz. Make sure it's totally immersed before you turn it on. Never put your finger in there unless it's unplugged. I have heard horror stories. It has not personally happened to me, but it never will because I will never make that mistake. I'm gonna strain this as I pour it into my ramekins because there might just be a little errant piece of unincorporated pumpkin or a little bit of cooked egg that, found its way in there. So I'm gonna grab a little, you could pour it. I don't have a pour spout on this bowl, so rather than getting something else dirty, I'm just gonna use a ladle. And so I have my 8 ramekins. These are 8-ounce ramekins. I have 8 of them. You could do this in any other size ramekin and you would just have more or less volume filling them. So your yield might be a little different. The most important thing is that the ramekins are all basically the same size and depth so that the mass is similar. Because if you have some taller ramekins and some really, sometimes you see for creme brulee, the really short wide ones. If you have a mix, you're not going to be able to get them in the same in the water bath at the same level, and one's going to cook faster than the other. So you just want the same ramekin. I actually have 2 slightly smaller ones, but they'll be fine. I have them set inside a roasting pan, and that is because I'm going to do a water bath. So I'm going to just fill these one at a time. Easier to fill not in the water bath, actually, not in the roasting pan. And you'll notice also that I have behind me, in that same saucepan, I didn't even clean it out, I have some water that I brought to a simmer. Is that Felix? Mm-hmm. Kitty! I have a lot of solids in here. Kitty! Felix really prefers the company of humans to other animals. Well, now the kitten's crying. We have a new kitten.
Tell us a story about the new kitten.
The kitten was a little stray. He's got one eye. He's so sweet. His name's Ringo. He's great. He's so sweet.
Who's he named after?
Ringo Starr, whose name was Richard Starsky. What was it? I didn't Starkey. I didn't know that. And Harrison's like, you thought his real name was Ringo Starr. I was like, yeah. I don't know. What do I know? Because there's like a Beatles backstory. It's a whole thing.
What's the backstory?
Harris was picking up a print from the frame store that was a print of this Beatles art that someone gifted to us, and that's where he found the little kitten.
Should have named him George.
I didn't think George was gonna be good. I named him like the fun name, like one that sounded like a pet name.
I had 2 cats named George.
Really? But I wanted it to be 2 syllables so it matched the other ones. I'm getting a new strainer. Am I maybe only making 6 of these? We'll see what the yield is. I switched strainers because that one was going real slow. So I'm going to go ahead and fill the rest of these, and then I'll show you how to do the water bath and get them into the oven. I forgot that I have the recipe, so I actually filled 4 ramekins, not 8. But I will put the full quantity in the description below. So that will make 8 will be your yield. So I just actually fitted the 4 ramekins into a smaller baking dish. You really just need a baking dish large enough to hold the ramekins. Like, you don't need a lot of extra space. As long as there's even a little bit of water flow around each one, you'll be fine. So my oven is on 325. That's going to be my baking temp. I have some barely simmering water on the stovetop. You always want to add hot water, because if you're not adding hot water, it's going to take the sort of ambient, like gentle heat of the oven like an incredibly long time to heat up, the custard, and then you're kind of like shooting yourself in the foot. So I have that water ready to go. I'm going to now just come over to my stove rather than bringing the boiling water over here and then back to the oven. I'm just going to do everything so that it's right by the oven, ready to go in, and these are going to bake. Quick note about creme brulee. Anytime you're baking a custard, you kind of don't want like a lot of air bubbles, and definitely the action of that immersion blender kind of like frothed it up a little bit. So I have some air bubbles, not really a big deal. This doesn't bother me that much. But if you have a lot of like big kind of almost like soapy looking bubbles, just use a spoon and like gently skim it off the surface. But this is fine. You just need a baking dish large enough to hold all the ramekins with even just like a little bit of room for the water to flow around. So even if they were touching, like that would be okay. And I have my water behind me that's at a very, very gentle, almost bare simmer. And you want to add hot water to your water bath, because if you were to add like cold or room temp water, it's just going to take an incredibly long time for the kind of gentle ambient heat of the oven to bring it up to temp to cook your custard. So it's kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So I'm going to very, very carefully pour my boiling water into my baking dish and then get the whole thing in the oven. I'm going to be smart about this. I'm going to take one out. What you don't want to do is do a lot of like splashing. You don't really want any of this water in your custard. And you don't need to fill your pan either. Just water coming to between 1/3 and halfway up the sides of your ramekin is totally fine. I'm gonna put the last one in. Often I bake custards covered for a lot of different reasons. I think they cook faster. I think they cook more evenly from the top. These I'm gonna do uncovered, because it's actually like not a bad thing for the surface for creme brulee to dry out a little bit. So covered, uncovered, it's kind of a matter of preference. I've done it both ways. If you look at my old sort of classic creme brulee recipe, they're covered. But here I don't think I need to. Okay, this is gonna go into the oven on the center rack. Be careful because this is hot. So in about 20 minutes or so, I'll start checking them. With custard, you definitely develop a feel over time for when they're done, just based on like experience and kind of like you develop a little bit of a muscle memory. But I'll definitely be sure to show you how I know they're done. Basically, you get a little bit of a wobble in the center of the custard, but not like a ripple. It's like the whole custard inside is moving as one piece with a wobble rather than like rippling like it's liquid. So anyway, in 20 minutes or so, I'll start checking. I didn't set a timer. I have no idea how long they've been going. Maybe 25 minutes? All right, these look good. So when I shake the rack, I see that there's a slight wobble in the center, but it's not like a water ripple. Okay, so I'm gonna pull them out. No, kitty, no. No, kitty. Hold on. I have this really cool trivet. I'm gonna use.
You should make your own at the ceramics class.
Oh, I should make my own at my ceramics class. That's a good idea. Okay, so obviously you want to be super careful because everything's hot. The water's hot, the ramekins are hot, the baking dish is hot. So, but these look great. Hi, sweet Felix. Okay. So I have a little bit of color on the surface, and that's actually because of those little fine bubbles, like the air was kind of an insulator and just the top got a little bit of color. Now these are gonna have some carryover cooking because they're pretty hot. So as they sit and start to cool off, that center will further set. So what I wanna do now is let them rest for like a minute in the water bath and then take them out and just let them sit at room temp. You wanna be really careful when you're handling these because again, super hot. Here's what I like to do.
You could use those canning.
Yeah, the
grippers.
like, do I have those? I think I got rid of, I had a pair once upon a time, but I think I got rid of them, which I regret. Right? So I'm gonna I like to use a spatula. This one's kind of good because it's pretty offset. And as I bring them out, I'm not lifting them over the ones next to them because I don't want to drip on the surface. So these are gonna sit now and cool off a little bit. And then before we can brulee the topping, which is, torching that sugar and getting that like glass-like caramelized layer on top, they need to chill. What you don't wanna do is torch them hot because you'll end up basically just kind of like melting the custard and then you'll have something kind of soupy rather than like smooth and creamy. So once these have a chance to cool a little bit, I'll pop them in the fridge and we'll have to come back in a couple hours and brulee them. But that's it for the most part.
All right, we're back. It's been in the fridge for 2 hours.
It's cold. So I grab the ramekins from the fridge. They're cold. The bottoms are cold. That's really important. You want to make sure they're fully set before you go into torching them. I want to sprinkle a nice even layer of sugar across the entire surface of the custard. And this is kind of a two-step process. I caramelize one layer and then I caramelize the second layer on top. And that's how you get that kind of really shattering, like thick layer. So make sure you cover any bare spots. Oh, it looks so good. Okay. Fantastic. Looks so good. Got nice and dark. And then I'm gonna go ahead and do that first layer on all of them. This one will cool for a second, and then I'm gonna come back and do that second layer of sugar. I think the important thing is that you're not keeping the torch in one place for longer than even just a second, because it can burn super easily. So that you just wanna keep it moving. Jeez. Not again.
Maybe let it burn for a second before you turn it upside down.
Yeah. Just keep trying. Well, I did 2 halfway. We should have rolled back to our own tape. TS 4000.
Yeah. How is it, chef?
Oh, it's kind of expensive.
Delicious. That's right.
Now it's all coming back to me that this one works better for creme brulee. But now I have the first layer done on all of them, and I'm going to go on to the second layer of sugar and caramelize that. Layer 2. So I have my creme brulee here. Super excited. The rims are a little warm from the torching, but the bottoms are still nice and cool. So I feel good about the set. So, wow. It's like a window pane. Ready? That was very satisfying. Take a look at the custard underneath. Ooh, it looks really nice. Super smooth. Ow. Piece of the sugar poked me. Worth it. I was afraid that it wouldn't be pumpkin-y because it can't have more pumpkin than it has dairy. Otherwise you end up eating something that is more like pumpkin pie filling than creme brulee, but it has such good pumpkin flavor. The warm spice is there, but it's just enhancing everything else and not overpowering. course, that like incredible vanilla flavor from the Heilala bean and extract that we added. But everything's really harmonious. Not too sweet. Everything feels like really imbalanced. And just super creamy. It's really good. A pumpkin version of creme brulee works so well because we're used to having pumpkin in like a custard kind of format, like pumpkin pie. But this is a little bit even more enjoyable because you don't have like so much puree that's kind of weighing down your custard, but it still has really good pumpkin flavor. And to me, it just makes a great gluten-free option in place of pumpkin pie. If you're entertaining, but it doesn't have to just be at Thanksgiving. You could make this all winter long. Again, if you want to just use canned pumpkin, use the equivalent amount. It'll be still super delicious. So I hope if you try this, you also try adding Heilala Vanilla. You can go to heilalavanilla.com, check it out. There is a code below, which you can use for 20% off your total order. And I want to thank Heilala for sponsoring this episode, and happy holiday baking, everyone. Don't forget to like and subscribe. You guys should try this. It's really good.